In the wake of that mass shooting in Toronto, politicians, police, and civilians are all asking the same questions. How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Gun control is now front and center. Before now, gun violence was often seen as a largely American problem, often comparisons between our city and big cities in the States. But a rise in shootings, not only in Toronto, but in almost every large city in the country, is proving that it is an issue that needs to be addressed. CTV's public safety analyst Chris Lewis is with us again in studio. And Chris, a day after the shooting, we heard from the mayor on the night of saying we have a gun control problem in this city. The mayor saying this yesterday.
Heard me ask the question of why anybody would need to buy 10 or 20 guns, which they can lawfully do under the present laws. And that leads to another question we need to discuss. Why does anyone in this city need to have a gun at all?
So they are talking, Chris, now of perhaps instituting a handgun ban. First of all, is that possible, and how do you enforce something like that?
You can't enforce it. I mean, a handgun ban in the city would be a bylaw offense. Because the handgun possession, licensing, acquiring, selling is all governed by federal legislation. And so if the municipality wants to say we're going to have a ban, then it would be, right in kind of in line with bylaws like parking. So there's not a lot of bite there.
No.
The reality.
So how do you check for that?
Well, exactly. And I mean, under the federal legislation, we're not knocking on doors and saying, show us your guns, which maybe should happen. There's some thoughts around that, but how are you going to do that under some sort of a municipal legislative scheme? I just don't see it happening. I get the point, but at the same time, there's so many legitimate handgun owners out there that aren't selling them to bad people.
Right.
And have them all locked up, and they go to gun ranges on the weekend. Some of them are people you and I know that are in this business. And so we don't need to further complicate their lives. We have to find a way to close loopholes so people that shouldn't have guns don't get them.
In covering the story in the last few days and speaking to different experts, we've been able to sort of piece together this idea that there is an increased demand for guns on the streets. Part of that idea comes from the fact that, well, I fear that you're armed, so I'm going to arm myself as well. We've taken away the option of street checks and carding, so that accountability tool that police will reference saying, look, at least I was able to ask, do you have a gun on your person?
Right.
That has now been taken away. So all three levels of government are left saying, how do we control this? If they are getting the guns illegally and they're buying them illegally here in Canada, how do you put the controls in place?
I don't have the answer. I wish I really wish I did. I think that there's so many issues around that. It's like we discussed in the past, the lure of the gang lifestyle. And so trying to deter people from getting in the lifestyle and wanting a gun. But we do need the ability to make sure serious background checks are done, perhaps regularly, on people that own handguns. Have the ability for doctors to immediately contact authorities when someone starts showing mental health issues that show they may be a threat to their own safety or the safety of somebody else. And then some sort of audit provisions where, like, some people, Anne-Marie, are buying 20 guns that are all the same. Who does that? It'd be like you buying 20 purses that are the same. It makes no sense.
Right.
So what's the ability of the police to then go in and say, we want to see all those guns 2 months later, 3 months later, we want to see all those guns, because some of these people are buying them just to sell them at a profit. And that's illegal, but you don't know about it till one turns up at a crime scene somewhere.
And I guess that's what I wanted to ask you about, is that trend that we're seeing, that it used to be that the guns were coming across the border illegally. Now they are.
And you still are. Yeah.
And they still are.
Yep.
So the recent numbers from Toronto Police say that now those numbers are at about 50%. 50% of people are bringing them up from the States. 50% of them are selling them illegally here in Canada. Why? Is it that the demand is up? Is that the profit is high?
The profit is high, the demand is up. It's all of those things. It's good business. It's illegal, but it's good business. When you look at the fact that you could buy so many guns at $600 a piece and then sell them for a few thousand a piece, if you're so inclined, there's a lot of money in it. And it's lower risk for you to sell them here than to try and smuggle them across the border in a truck or a boat. Because we've put a lot of focus on that. They're still coming through. I mean, cartons of cigarettes or boxes and cases of cigarettes are getting through, so guns are going to get through too. We still need to deal with that from a border perspective, and hopefully Bill Blair, the new minister, will help deal with that because he knows some of those issues. But as that's being enforced, other things will pop up, like people saying, wow, I can sell my 5 handguns because I've got 20 of them, which makes no sense to me whatsoever, and I'll make a profit. But then we got guns on the street with people, in the hands of people that shouldn't have guns.
So the solution is still still looking to be found.
It's a multifaceted thing because there's so many aspects to it. We need to identify all the loops and close them all we can.
Chris, good to have you here. Thanks so much for your
Thank
insight.
you.